Okay, it looks like it's top of the hour. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Just a couple quick things before we get started. You can use the questions panel to submit any questions during the webinar. We'll try to get to those at the end. And your certificates will be available this Friday by logging into your account. Dr. Thomas, if you're ready to get started, go right ahead.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you guys for taking time out of your busy schedules to hang out with me this afternoon. I, right up front, don't have anything to disclose other than I am a fan of the Green Bay Packers and I went to Marquette University. All right, so we're going to talk about breastfeeding, promotion, protection, and support, why we do it and why it is so hard to do sometimes. So hopefully I don't have to convince too many people about this slide, but human infants and young children are most likely to survive, grow, and develop to their full potential when fed human milk from their mothers through breastfeeding due to the dynamic and interactional nature of breastfeeding and the unique living properties of breast milk. It is hard to replicate that. And so it is important for all of us to do what we can to make sure that human babies get human milk. So let's talk about some of the unique characteristics of breast milk and what that means to mom and to baby and to to public health in general. For mom, and we don't really talk about maternal benefits that much, but we see that there is a reduced risk of breast and ovarian cancer. There is reduced hypertension and type 2 diabetes, and there's psychological well-being that happens because of some of the hormones involved in breastfeeding, like oxytocin. I heard one of my favorite speakers say that the changes from pregnancy don't go away with delivery of the baby. The changes in pregnancy go away with the initiation of lactation. So there are things that happen in mom's body that are waiting for lactation in order to go back to its pre-pregnancy state. For babies, the benefits to human milk are reduced diarrhea, lower respiratory tract infections, and ear infections. It is a way to fight infection and to prevent them from even happening. There is reduced eczema and allergies, and there is reduced sudden infant death. We also see some long-term effects for babies, like a positive effect on their IQ and their social behaviors. There is reduced type 1 diabetes and leukemia. There's a reduction in autism spectrum disorders and protection against obesity. These are all really important public health measures, and we see these benefits for moms and babies, and it should make us realize what kind of advocates we need to be for moms and babies. So let's talk a little bit about the infection fighting properties of human milk, because when we talk about infant mortality in a little bit, we will see that when you take a look at some of the things that contribute to infant mortality, infection is right up there. So one of the things that happens because of human milk is that the baby gets a large population of good bacteria in the gut. And those gut microbes, if the baby is breastfed, are going to help the baby fight infection, and it has long-term implications for the health and well-being of that baby. And we can see on this slide that there are a lot of different things that go into creating the gut microbiome. For breastfeeding practices, the mode of breastfeeding, pumped milk versus feeding directly at the breast, whether or not that breastfeeding experience is exclusive, can impact the microbiome. We will see some things in terms of like antibiotics in birth mode, where the kids born via vaginal deliveries have a little different gut microbe population than kids who are born via C-section. Having siblings is positive for your gut microbiome. So I guess it's super cool to have, I don't know, poopy siblings. We will also see that birth weight and prematurity has an impact on gut microbes, but there is a lot of what happens with the gut microbiome that happens because of feeding. We also see that there is contribution to a milk microbiota, where the baby is receiving colonies of different bacteria from the milk, different bacteria from the mode of delivery. And so all of those things contribute to how that baby is going to fight infection and other long-term events. We also have we typically talk about the gut microbiome in terms of good bacteria, but we also see that there is a virome, so good viruses that hang out. There are good yeast colonies that hang out. And so we have a tendency when we talk about human milk to talk about gut bacteria, but there are also other things that human milk can influence. And then those gut microbes help the baby fight infection, among other things. And one of those other things is inflammation. And so if we are putting bacteria into the gut of a newborn, we really can't have that newborn's immune system start responding to those bacteria, because one of the things that happens when your immune system responds to bacteria is that you get inflammation. And we can do that through normal immune pathways. So we've got a slide here that shows that there is a cellular response and a humoral response. You get a foreign body, it gets eaten by a macrophage, and then we get cytokines, which are pro-inflammatory. We see activation of helper T cells. Something that says cytotoxic in it is probably not great for the gut of a baby. And so the normal response of the immune system of the newborn has to get around inflammation. There are consequences to having an inflammatory response in a newborn. We're going to talk a little bit about B cells. B cells differentiate into very specific antibodies against things that the baby has come in contact with. The cellular response tends to be a little more, it's a bigger response rather than a very specific response. So we have something that is going to be designed exactly for that infection and stuff that is just part of the innate immune system, and it helps in general to repair things. So we don't just have good bacteria that is in human milk. We have a bunch of anti-inflammatory ingredients that protect the infant from the inflammatory innate immune system. We're going to talk a little bit about the immunoglobulins that we see in human milk, because when babies are born, they have a very uniquely programmed immune system. The only immunoglobulins that babies have at the time of birth is transplacental immunoglobulin G. So immunoglobulin E, which is involved in fighting parasitic infections, there isn't any measurable immunoglobulin E at birth. We can get immunoglobulin A, which is a really sticky immunoglobulin, and it focuses on the protection of the baby from a mucous membrane. And then there's immunoglobulin M, which is the first immunoglobulin that shows up with an infection. If we take a look what is actually in that baby, we see the immunoglobulin G, that is a memory immunoglobulin that crosses the placenta. But the milk, the breast milk that the baby receives, is going to have immunoglobulins, and that is going to trigger a cascade of infection fighting that the baby gets right from the first feeding. So immunoglobulin A is the most abundant immunoglobulin in human milk, accounting for probably 90% of the immunoglobulins that we see. It is absolutely important for mucosal immunity. The oral mucosa, the gut GI tract, it is a really important infection fighting cell. I'm always telling people that when the babies come out, they don't need to eat right away, because, like, seriously, if they did, like, what was the third trimester all about when the kids were like making us cramp and eating all the time? The kids need to come out and not get sick. And the first milk that moms make, the colostrum, is really filled with antibodies, and most of them are immunoglobulin A to protect the GI tract of that newborn. There is some immunoglobulin M in human milk. It's about 8%. It can also be created by the mammary gland. Immunoglobulin G originates in blood because it crosses the placenta, but there isn't as much immunoglobulin E as the other immunoglobulins. So we see the highest concentration of immunoglobulins in colostrum, which makes a lot of sense. We get some of those memory cells across the placenta. It decreases in the first months and then stops with weaning. So during the course of lactation for that mom and baby, we see immunoglobulin M. IgG crosses the placenta. And in mothers with immunoglobulin G against respiratory syncytial virus, and we are so close to be fighting RSV again for the winter. So in mothers with immunoglobulin G against RSV, secretory immunoglobulin G for RSV is found in breast milk. And so one of the ways that we protected kids last year when we had COVID and influenza and RSV happening all at the same time, one of the ways that we could keep kids healthy is very specific immunoglobulins for RSV. RSV protection also comes from immunoglobulin A antibodies to an RSV surface protein, which then inhibits viral replication. We can't overestimate how bad last year was in terms of infection. And the kids that I take care of that were breastfed had a medicine that we just couldn't produce for those kids. We also have a unique synergy between mom and baby. And so at the end of the feeding, the baby inserts some of their saliva back into the breast, and we have the creation of more infection-fighting cells. The combination produces a potent stimulatory and inhibitory metabolites that regulate the early oral and gut microbiota. It is just a really cool system that will help the babies fight infection right from the start. I have a lot of people in my practice that want to pump so that they can keep track of how much the baby is eating. And one of the things I try to help out with is maybe getting the kids to breast a couple of times a day so that this synergy can take place and the baby can receive even more protection. We can talk about why people feel like they need to pump so that they can see how much they're making. We'll bring that up at the end of this. There are other inflammatories in human milk. In fact, a lot of the ingredients in human milk have 2 or 3 different roles within the baby. This is prebiotics that are present in human milk. They are non-digestible food components that affect the gut by providing food for the good bacteria that are already in it. In human milk, the most common prebiotics are oligosaccharides, and they are the 3rd most common component of mature human milk. The oligosaccharides are really fun to learn about. They are so specific to each mom that they can present as a fingerprint. There are so many of them that have been discovered by Dr. Lars Bode. Their structure gives their function, and importantly for the baby is that they are resistant to low pH. So if the baby drinks this, there isn't really high pH in the baby's gut that is going to deactivate these oligosaccharides or digest them. And so the first things that go into the baby's gut are things that are going to be able to survive a mildly acidic environment. And you'll see that the really important ingredients are able to resist degradation in the stomach. So this is how this works. The really cool way that this is set up so that babies don't need to have inflammation. If there aren't any oligosaccharides present, as in this left panel, then bacteria can just attach to the receptors on the cell wall of the GI tract, and there's the potential for infection. The HMO acts as a decoy so that you get oligosaccharides binding to the bacteria and never getting to the cell wall, so that in the middle panel, the cell receptor is never activated. Or the oligosaccharide itself binds that receptor on the gut wall, and the bacteria can't attach and just go out in the stool. So this is a non-inflammatory way to have babies fight infection, and it's really important. Again, we do not want inflammation in the gut of a newborn. There are so many cool oligosaccharides that we're just figuring out what their function is. The 2-fucosyl-lactose might fight cholera, E. coli, Campylobacter, all sorts of really not very pleasant GI infections. The 3-sialolactose is also something that can make it difficult for E. coli to bind. And then the DSLNT is so exciting, but if you have the DSLNT as part of the oligosaccharides that you make as a mom, it's been shown in animal experiments to prevent necrotizing enterocolitis, which is just amazing. And the pharmacological aspects of that are really exciting, to be having other things that we can help premature babies not have their gut infected. I also want to talk about another ingredient, the epigenetics that are present, epigenetic modifiers that are present in human milk. And whenever I hear about epigenetics, I hear like that the DNA is the hardware and the epigenome is like the software. You don't change the hardware, you can change the software. I don't know anything about that. My first degree from Marquette University is in English literature. And so I want to explain the epigenome as like the DNA is Shakespeare, like the written word. And then the epigenome is the actors and the producers and the set design. And you wind up getting a little different Romeo and Juliet depending on who is creating it. And so our epigenome is modifiable. It is a pattern of turning genes off and on. And it's an incredible thing to think about, because when we talk about these epigenetic modifiers being present in human milk, we are talking about the exchange of genetic information without conception. So I learned like half your DNA from your dad, half your DNA from your mom, right? And then you get together and that's what happens. But we get epigenetic modifiers. Epigenetic modifiers cannot change your DNA, but they can change some of the things that are expressed. So for example, identical twins, if one of them has schizophrenia, then there is a 50% chance that the second twin will also develop schizophrenia. But if they actually had the same genome that was going to be expressed in exactly the same way, then that risk to identical twins should be 100%, right? So there is something that is modifying the way that genes are expressed. And one of them we're going to take a look at right now. This is called microRNA, sorry. So pretty typically what happens is that we go from DNA to RNA to making a protein. That's what I learned probably in college and my kids learned in like grade school, but DNA to RNA to protein. MicroRNA will bind to messenger RNA and stop protein assembly. Now that's pretty cool to think about, because you're going to get cells. There are stem cells in human milk. That stem cell doesn't know if it's going to be a heart or a liver. And so you're going to have to turn off some genes and turn on some genes so that we get the liver or the cardiac cell that we were looking for. And so there is a lot of epigenetic modifiers that we find in human milk. In fact, breastfed infants get approximately 1.3 times 10 to the 7th copies per liter per day of microRNA. There's the highest concentration of microRNA in any bodily fluid. And so we learn that breast milk is a major epigenetic modifier of gene expression in the milk recipient. It is under the influence of hormones like insulin and prolactin. And I throw that in there because we have a big problem with insulin regulation, insulin sensitivity in the United States, and things that impact insulin and mom's health may impact her milk or the composition of her milk. These microRNAs are carried in exomes, which are a budding of the cell membrane. It allows those really important pieces of microRNA to travel without being degraded. And so I've said this a couple of times, right? If it's something that resists degradation, it is really important for the health and well-being of that baby. The exome is used in lots of different ways to mediate crucial communication from mom to baby. Those exomes and the microRNA are found in colostrum, they're found in mature milk, and they're found throughout a feeding. And so there are some really important ingredients that help us modify the way that we go out into the world. And those ingredients right now are only available through human milk. So we have epigenetic signals that are delivered to the infant through this microRNA, and that results in more protein for the baby that can help in metabolism, immune system functions, the production of important fatty acids, muscle growth, and bone growth. And so these are really important tiny molecules that we see in human milk in abundance. I don't know who names these, but I feel like they can do a little better, because the most abundant microRNA in human milk is microRNA 148A. It is something that they artificially can increase in lactating cows, because microRNA 148A increases milk volume. But microRNA 148A is found in human milk, And it can help with T cell activity and decreasing allergy risk. And it increases food intake for growth, and it can work on growth through fat metabolism. So just that one microRNA is found in abundance, and it is really important for the health and well-being and growth of that newborn. I don't know why this family waited so long to put that cheese head on their kid. I mean, it should start a whole lot earlier, but here we are. This is just to show you that even the just one bottle that happens so frequently in hospitals can be a problem. This is a randomized controlled trial that was done in Japan in 2019. And they randomized kids to either get cow's milk-based formula or exclusive breastfeeding. And what they found was that the babies who received cow's milk-based formula in the first 3 days of life were at higher risk of cow milk protein allergy, including anaphylaxis at the age of 2. So we have to be really careful about what we're putting into the gut of our newborns, and hopefully we can be very positive advocates to getting more human milk into babies. So the infection protection that comes from human milk is diarrhea and respiratory infections, ear infections, urinary tract infections, and then some improvement for neonatal sepsis, for coughing and wheezing, and for infant mortality. So it's protection against death. So the interactions and outcomes of breastfeeding cannot be artificially replicated. There are risks to mom and baby because of the lack of breastfeeding. Every once in a while, I'll have somebody still tell me that it doesn't really matter in the United States, and it really does matter in the United States. We have issues with disparities and equity, and we have to sort of check our biases at the door when we're trying to advocate for moms and babies. So we're going to talk a little bit about the infant mortality rate. The Lancet has had this past year an expose on what happens with infant mortality, taking a look at formula marketing. So I thought we would go through some of this information. The infant mortality rate is a death before the first birthday per 1,000 live births. It is a reflection of the health and well-being of a nation. And the US has a higher mortality rate than other high-income countries. The reason that this rate is expressed as death per 1,000 live births is that it gives us a number that is comparable across the sizes of different countries. And so this is a pretty standard way of describing the health and well-being of our infants. And I hear this all the time, that we are not a third world country where breastfeeding is super important, and that it doesn't matter how people feed their babies in the United States because of our healthcare system. Tad ironic, but I do hear a lot that it doesn't matter in the US. So if we take a look at the infant mortality rates by state in this left-hand panel, we will see that the darkest blue is the highest mortality rate, infant mortality rates in the United States. I'm looking at Wisconsin. We have got a lot of work to do, but a lot of the states in the South, they have a pretty high infant mortality rate. They also have low breastfeeding rates. And so there's a definite correlation between not starting breastfeeding and an increased infant mortality rate. If we take a look at the different things that are in the top 10 reasons for infant mortality, we see that congenital malformations account for a lot, almost 20%. Premature births, so lower birth weight, is up to 15%. And then we see sudden infant death syndrome, unintentional injuries, maternal complications, cord and placental complications, and then infections like bacterial sepsis of the newborn, respiratory distress, diseases of the heart and lungs, and then intrauterine hypoxia and birth asphyxia. But we have a couple of the most common causes of infant mortality that are addressed by human milk feeding, like sudden infant death syndrome and bacterial sepsis. We also have disparities in the initiation and continuation of breastfeeding. And we'll find that non-Hispanic Black in the United States has the highest risk of infant mortality. So we've got a lot of work to do, and it absolutely does matter in the United States that we do better in getting human milk into babies. So this is 2019, and our recommendation has been for exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months, and then the introduction of nutrient-dense foods around 6 months, and then continuing for as long as mom and baby would like to. The AAP changed their recommendation to get in line with the WHO just last year. So any breastfeeding, we see that we start at about 83%, which is amazing. We are not as good at exclusive breastfeeding, and it gets really hard in the US to get to exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months because we have a 7-second maternity leave. So we do see a big drop off in the time for people who initiate. By 3 months, we're already down to 70%. So there's a lot of reasons that families find it hard to continue breastfeeding in the US. But it's important. The risk of all-cause mortality compared to exclusively breastfed infants. If you're predominantly breastfed, you have a risk of 1.5. Partially breastfed, you have a relative risk of 4.8. And if you are never breastfed, you have a relative risk of 14 of all-cause mortality. If we have risk of infection-related mortality in kids who are 0 to 5 months, predominantly breastfed kids have a relative risk of 1.7. Partially breastfed kids have a relative risk of 4.5, and non-breastfed babies have a relative risk of 8.6, which is pretty high. And so it's pretty clear that mortality and infection play a role in preserving the health and well-being of our kids in the US. So this is the latest data. It's a breastfeeding report card from 2019. This is something that you can find by going to the CDC and searching the breastfeeding report card. You can get state-specific data. But among infants born in 2019, most started out receiving some breast milk, so 83%. That's pretty amazing. And 78.6 were receiving any breast milk at a month. At 6 months, 55.8% of infants received any breast milk, and 25% receive breast milk exclusively. And we know that even some breast milk is beneficial to infants. I feel like too, the 83% of moms delivering in the United States have the intention to breastfeed or start giving breast milk. And I think that if we ever get 83% of a population that wants to do something, we should be very good at supporting that. So but the CDC report card also tells us this, that many families do not breastfeed for as long as they intend to, that there are breastfeeding disparities by race and ethnicity that continue to persist. And the steady decline in any and exclusive breastfeeding from month to month indicates that breastfeeding families may need stronger systems of support to reach their breastfeeding goals. So breastfeeding is so great, why doesn't everybody do it? Like, what is the problem? Well, I've already hinted, that there are some issues with maternity leave and parental leave policies in the US. Go back to biology. Lactogenesis stage 2 is when we get an increase in milk volume and there is changes in many milk constituents. It's the removal of the placenta, which causes a drop in progesterone, and as progesterone drops, we get higher milk volumes, and this takes place over the first 5 to 6 days. But normal milk production really requires prolactin, insulin, and cortisol, along with oxytocin for its release. But we have some issues with insulin in the United States, and we have to do a good job of predicting who might be impacted by a lower milk supply because of insulin resistance. So there are some biological reasons that we see that people are unable to keep up with exclusive breastfeeding or decide not to breastfeed their babies. We also have a large amount of non-evidence-based maternity care practices, and that's changeable, right? we can go in and we can fix those non-evidence-based primary care or maternity care practices. Like, and it's just, it's simple things, right? We want the babies to try to go to breast at least 8 to 12 times every 24 hours. But then somebody says that babies are supposed to eat every 2 to 3 hours. We have never said that the babies need to eat every 2 to 3 hours. Healthy term infants need to eat when they're hungry, and we have to teach feeding cues, but we can't be like, we want you to feed him when he looks hungry, but as long as it's every 2 to 3 hours. We are really looking at least 8 to 12 feedings every 24 hours. We also see that there is bias in everything we do in healthcare. We find that Black mothers wean their infants 10.3 weeks earlier than did white mothers. College education and marital status differed between groups and predicted shorter breastfeeding durations. But this again, fixable. White mothers were significantly less likely to experience in-hospital formula introduction than Black mothers, which was the biggest predictor of breastfeeding duration, even in models controlling for racial and ethnic disparities in initiation and postnatal intent. And poverty was not a unique predictor of breastfeeding duration. This is something where we can stop doing this. Formula supplementation in the first 48 to 72 hours has got to be for medical reasons and not because somebody is tired at night or whatever else reasons that we bring in bottles in the middle of the night. We are being hired to help with the breastfeeding journey, and we should do the best job we can for that. I also hear, and I am not gonna, like, I get it, that sometimes my pediatric colleagues do things that are not evidence-based. Weird. Okay, so a couple of things that you might be able to share with the pediatricians in your life is that there is a brand new breastfeeding residency curriculum that is available on the AAP website. It is not just for residents. We have heard that people for WIC peer counselor programs or other educational programs have been using the curriculum. But breastfeeding is the best for health of infants and mothers. As more mothers are choosing to breastfeed, more physicians need to have the skills to support them. Being able to successfully handle any issue related to breastfeeding leads to a stronger doctor-patient bond and better outcomes. And when families get the help they need, the more we reduce health disparities that impact infants from the start. All sorts of good reasons to get better education to our student doctors, but to anybody else who wants to learn. This is what the breastfeeding curriculum looks like when you go to the AAP site. There are different ways that you can approach this. It is not meant to be something that you sit down and do like one time every year. This is meant to be a longitudinal experience where if you are working with breastfeeding moms, you can use the curriculum across your education to help you understand and advocate for the patients that you're working with. So we see things like medical knowledge, ways to simulate patient care, and then things that we can do for systems-based practice. So from the individual up to the system, trying to advocate for moms and babies in no matter what arena that you help them with. We also have a brand new breastfeeding handbook for physicians. It's in its 3rd edition. It's available on Amazon. It's available on the AAP website. It is a resource of breastfeeding initiation, maintenance, support, and advocacy. You see up in the corner here, it says it's policy of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And we say it's AAP policy that has some clout. It is something that we worked together with ACOG to create. And it features the most up-to-date developments in breastfeeding practice, research, policies, and outreach guidance, and it's assembled by an expert physician panel. Also, I don't know if there's anybody who still needs to hear this, but the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine has some pretty amazing protocols so that if you are trying to change things at the hospital level or in the outpatient clinic, we've got some evidence-based protocols that are available to anybody on the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine website. That website is bfmed.org, and you'll see it under the protocols tab. There's a whole bunch of new ones that have just come out, and the more recent ones have guidance for families, not just for healthcare personnel. This is actually some some forms for families. And then at some point, we got to start talking about family leave and parental leave, because it is really hard to ask people to exclusively breastfeed for 6 months when we're sending them back into the classroom 2 weeks later, or to a job that they have to start when they're a month postpartum. It is not easy to do that. And if you guys have any way of advocating for paid family leave, this is the time to do it. It was the time to do it ages ago, but let's just say it is the time to do it now. So these are the places that have paid family leave. It always seems to be the West Coast. I'm a little jealous. I am in a state that's surrounded by states that are doing better. Sometimes that's helpful. If we say, hey, Minnesota and Michigan have this going on, sometimes we can get things done. But there is so much work to do to treat families in the United States with more respect. And then if breastfeeding is so good, why doesn't everybody do it? Well, here it is. We market, you will never have enough milk. We market it nonstop. We market that you will never have enough milk. And I've got some examples. But perceived insufficient milk supply is everywhere. It's everywhere. I just had it today. I've been working this morning. I've had people telling me today that they don't think that they've had enough milk. I've got this kid was like a 12-pound 2-month-old, and mom was worried she didn't have enough milk, because this is what we do. We market at new families that they're never going to have enough milk. So I like to say, do or do not. There is no try. You're gonna be able to do this. Didn't you just grow a baby? Wouldn't this be cool if you just had the same faith in your body? Perceived insufficient milk supply is a misperception of actual milk supply, and moms are supplementing and weaning because they feel they have no milk or they can't satisfy their kids. Perceived insufficient milk supply, it's everywhere. It's as important as Star Wars. It is a cultural phenomenon. It is marketed and it grosses lots of money. And the story is passed down from generation to generation. And sometimes it's the lack of social support. Most of the time, it's marketing practices of infant formula companies. There are also non-evidence-based maternity care practices, even the switching from 8 to 12 feedings to 8 to 12 feedings instead of every 2 to 3 hours. That can be beneficial, right? If you think your baby's going to eat every 2 to 3 hours and they want to eat more, then you don't think you have enough milk. And if they want to sleep, then you think that the baby's going to be starving. And that just undermines any kind of success that you're going to have with breastfeeding. I think that maybe I don't have enough milk is a socially acceptable way to stop breastfeeding. I dried up, I don't have enough milk, which is fine. But the other things that we need to do are impacting the amount of marketing materials that new moms in our culture experience. This is from the Lancet talking about trying to promote breastfeeding in a world where formula companies have a $2 billion marketing budget. So there's advertising and promotion that they can do, funding of professionals, they can lobby, they will target individuals, they target health professionals, and the effect is all sorts of different things that happens. Like the formula companies, they actively work against family leave, because if moms have to go back to work, then they're going to need their product, right? Like, so this is, the new family is just targeted by all sorts of different overt advertising, but other, like, not so overt. Like, for example, this is a graph taken from evidence-based updates in the first week of exclusive breastfeeding. This was published in Pediatrics as a state-of-the-art review. On day 1, kids who were born via vaginal deliveries got about 6 milliliters per kilo of body weight. So let's say we have like a giant 4-kilo baby. 6 per kilo is what, 24? See, I don't do public math, and here I am. But let's just say it's an ounce, that the baby is going to take an ounce over the first 24 hours. The entire first day, the baby gets an ounce. And then somebody comes in with this bottle. It's a 60 ml bottle. So if you are looking at, let's say you're doing hand expression or you're pumping, and you see that you've pumped like what the baby needs, a couple of teaspoons. And then you say, gosh, I'm really tired, somebody brings in this bottle. This is intentionally large. So the people that are trying to pump see that they are never going to do this, because they aren't. Nobody's going to pump like 60 mLs at a try on the first 24 hours. And so this is just a smaller way about how we can, how we sort of undermine somebody's breastfeeding attempts. The lactation cookies, like, come on, like, it's just so problematic to me, because the people that I'm helping with low milk supply are not cookie deficient. Like, they need some help. And it's the fact that those lactation cookies, they don't do anything, but they're at target. People start eating them thinking that there's going to be an increase in milk. But anyway, so this is what I do with Oreos. I want families to stack 8 Oreos, and then every time that they feed the baby, they eat an Oreo, and then when the pile's gone, then they win. And so we're not looking at the time in between the feedings, we were just looking at the number of feedings. And so these are my lactation cookies, and they look like Oreos. We also market that cranky babies are abnormal, that babies who pass gas or cry, or who have rumbling stomachs, or who spit up, are somehow the parent's fault, and there are things that we need to fix. If babies don't pass gas, they explode, like legitimately. Like, that's not okay. They have to pass gas, but yet we have turned that into something that is not normal. And that we have a, some kind of thing that you can buy that's going to make babies pass less gas. So one of the things that you hear a lot is that, oh, you had, I don't know, Brussels sprouts yesterday, and now the baby is upset. So that the baby is doing normal baby things, but then we blame the mom for the baby being cranky. Like, babies are cranky. Moms don't make babies cranky. Like, they didn't do it, but we are marketing that they did. And we have a lot of information about, like, taste being developed before delivery. Breast milk gives the babies a ton of flavors. We see that the first taste that babies have is in amniotic fluid, and then the next taste of native culture is through breast milk. And so we get anecdotes about certain problematic foods and maybe cow's milk protein, but we don't really have any other data that says that what mom eats is going to be a problem. But we're going to blame her anyway. Like, that's what we do. So we have a continuum of tastes that are available to the baby, and it's how people get used to the tastes of their native cuisine. It's how, like, my mother-in-law is from Thailand. I can't eat that food, Thai food. Like, I just am, but the whole country manages to figure out how to eat Thai food, and that's because there are flavor experiences that happen before the kids even start to eat. These are like fake formula things, but this is from the Lancet. And these are, this is what the formulas look like, right? For fussiness, gas, colic, and crying. For, look at, it quickly soothes colic and crying in 1 day. There's just a lot of stuff that the can promises that there is no way that is going to ever happen. But if you're a family who thinks you're doing something wrong, then you take a look at the front of this can, and they are selling you peace of mind. At least you changed it over to something that is not supposed to make them fussy, right? And so there's always these messages that are working on families to make them think that what they do is not good enough. And it's not just the lactation cookies, people. It isn't just the formula manufacturers. This is something I took from a tongue tie site, and look at all of the things that they have said that tongue tie causes: gassiness, gagging, reflux, and like shallow latch, poor latch, slow weight gain, weight loss, excessive weight gain. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff on here that is just normal baby stuff. And there is a product that somebody is trying to sell, right? So we have messages all over the place that tell families that they're never going to do it right without buying something. And this is my least favorite question in the whole world. Is your baby sleeping through the night yet? Because the formula companies even admit that they're selling sleep. Babies don't sleep at night. Every time that somebody asks one of my families in my practice if the baby is sleeping through the night yet, I make them charge $10. Like, just, that's going to cost you $10, because the answer is no, the baby's not sleeping, or people lie about whether or not the baby's sleeping, or worse, we start doing like sleep training in really little babies. And it is just, this is just an insidious, unsupportive question to ask for families who are are going through this. So try not to, let's try not to talk about sleep as being the like the be all and end all of American parenting, because seriously, like, the babies are not defective. Our system is defective. Babies don't sleep at night. Nobody has figured out how to get them to sleep at night. They're like, anyway, there's a big soapbox I just got on. Okay. We also know that if we aren't better at supporting families, that we see more cases of otitis media, more cases of necrotizing enterocolitis, and we see more cases of excess number of child deaths. If there is ever breastfeeding, there is a 21% reduced risk of post-neonatal deaths and 31% for Black infants. This is not, we have to treat this seriously. We have to do better at the insidious marketing messages that we send to families. We know that breastfeeding for more than 2 months is associated in a SIDS risk, the reduction of 40%. Breastfeeding for more than 4 months, there is a 60% reduction in SIDS. Breastfeeding for more than 6 months, there's a 64% reduction in SIDS. Anytime that we talk about safe sleep, we also have to put breastfeeding in that conversation, because SIDS reduction is amazing in babies who are breastfed. So what does human milk feeding mean to family health? It means infection protection, obesity prevention, prevention of malnutrition and SIDS, prevention of mortality. There are decreased risks of leukemia, asthma, and allergies. We see birth spacing to healthier time spans. There's a decreased risk of breast and ovarian cancer, a decreased risk of diabetes and cardiovascular disease in the moms who are breastfeeding. This is an important public health measure, and we should be doing everything we can to support those moms and babies. What do we need? Well, okay, here's a wish list. We need investment in public health. We need more people that are skilled in counseling support and support of the breastfeeding family. We need more education. We need societal change grounded in human rights and equity. We need regulation of the companies and their marketing practices, and we need some resources. We don't have enough resources to battle a $2 billion marketing budget. I'd like to thank all of you guys for joining me this afternoon. I'm happy to answer questions, and go get them. What all of you guys do is so important for the health and well-being of babies, and know that I see you and that I am grateful for all the work that you do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas, for presenting for us. I learned a lot during that presentation. We do have about 13 minutes or so for questions and answers, so we will jump right in. As a reminder, you can use the questions panel to submit those questions. The first one is, how can I bring about change as an individual?
Right, because a lot of these are like big pie in the sky, 30,000 feet, look like this is what we need to have happen. But you can do it simply just by like not asking if the baby's sleeping through the night, right? Like saying that, sort of normalizing new parenting experiences, correcting misinformation when you hear it, working with your hospital to change non-evidence-based practices. But you can do it individually. And I'll tell you, I'm going to be a grandma for the first time in December. And I'm sort of looking at this with a new lens now, as sort of really wanting to protect my grandson who has not yet been born. But I really want to make sure that the evidence that my daughter-in-law and my son get is just filled with positive. And I just see so much misinformation that's out there. And so if you can, just support a breastfeeding mom near you, a pregnant mom near you, and make sure that they get access to evidence-based care.
Congratulations on that grandbaby that's coming. That's exciting.
Yeah.
The next question is, do any of the immunoglobulins get lost in the freezing thawing process or pasteurization of donor milk?
Yeah, there's some changes in the infection fighting cells. You mostly see it in like white blood cells, like living cells, macrophages, that kind of stuff. That they don't take kindly to freeze thaw, but there is a lot that is still left over. The microRNA does not get destroyed by the pasteurization process, and there's a lot of infection fighting cells that still make it through that protection fighting, those infection fighting cells. So it's not, there is a decrease. Like anytime that milk goes someplace else besides breast to baby, there are some changes that are going to happen. But donor milk is still a very valuable resource.
Thank you for that. The next question is, this is a question that has to do with mode of breast milk delivery to the babies relating to the gut microbiome. Any
Right.
studies done in the NICU as to how effectively donor milk delivers immunoglobulins and prebiotics to this high-risk group of babies?
Yeah, lots of them, lots of great studies. It's one of the reasons I feel like, at least around where I am, that the NICUs have been leading the charge for donor milk, because there are changes in outcomes for babies in the NICU who receive mother's own milk or donor milk above something like cow's milk protein in formulas. So yeah, there's a lot of data. Good stuff. I did part of a fellowship in neonatology a million years ago, so I'm not as up to date on that guidance, but we definitely know that human milk has the capability of preventing infection and inflammatory disease states like NEC in the NICU.
Thank you. The next question is the SIDS reduction for exclusive or partial breastfeeding?
Any, yeah, it's for any. It's for any breastfeeding.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, why is the back to sleep promoted over breastfeeding, then to protect against SIDS, and moms are mom shamed if they breastfeed and co-sleep?
That is a wonderful question. Probably deserves about an hour-long answer. Like, the things that we do around sleep are very, very strange. And I feel like maybe we have influence of other things besides just evidence-based biology. But yeah, you're onto something there.
Okay, thank you for that. Someone did mention that they clicked the link for the curriculum that you had talked about in slide 40, I believe it was, and they said it went to a 2024 fee-based curriculum. So
No, that's not right. If you, I mean,
okay,
Google, if you go to AAP residency, breastfeeding residency curriculum, if you Google that, you should be able to find it.
okay, and I can also provide that and make sure everyone has the link that works. So that's perfect. Okay, the next question is, how do I approach a doctor's office that has formula coupons at the checkout counter?
Well, so we have written that down. Like, there is AAP policy that says don't do that. And sometimes I think that people just don't know the harm that they're doing. And so it's an educational opportunity. I have partners, like the people that I work with, that hand out formula samples. And I have had some interesting conversations with them, and they really don't think they're doing anything wrong. But I feel like when it's against AAP policy, when it's against the guidelines of your supervising organization, that you should take a little bit more time to understand what harm is happening there. I know that in my institution, if the thing that we're getting for free is worth, like, if you're giving a family something that's worth a lot of money, which cans of formula coupons are, that goes against corporate compliance. I would just have a conversation. I think that the conversation is a good starting point, because most of the people don't actually know that they're doing anything that is potentially harmful. They think they're helping. So I just talk.
Okay, thank you. We have about 6 minutes approximately. We will go to the next question. Any suggestions on changing OB nurses' thought processes on breastfeeding? They stock formula in the cribs even after education regarding the importance of breastfeeding.
Yeah, right. So it's trying to figure out, like, what you can say that is going to change that behavior. And sometimes it has to be a system change, where you have to, like, talk to the people who write the protocols or the admission orders or something. And sometimes it's just trying to get one person at a time to do things. I know that I have gone and talked to OB groups, and I feel like maybe they didn't understand the impact of some of the things that they were doing. I really do think people think that they're being helpful. And there's a lot of education that needs to be done. If they choose not to understand it after the education is over, then it needs to be like a systems-based change. You have to do something for the unit. You have to do something with a manager, because this is not like first do no harm. There is harm that comes from mixed messaging and teaching people that 2 ounces is normal in the newborn nursery. Like I'm fighting it too. Like we're all sort of fighting this battle, and I'm going to be looking forward to not having to do that at some point in the future. But I have the conversation, and if it's not going to work on an individual level, then you need to do a systems-based change.
Okay, the next question is, how can we help a mom who's already feels she's not making enough and has already started giving formula? How can we convince her that she can do it?
I do that every day, all day, every day. We have a over 50% supplementation rate at my hospital, and I try to do the education in the hospital, but it is really hard to combat what goes on there. And then I just talk about normal behavior and reframe the observations, the very legitimate observations that moms have about, like, I fed him and he was hungry 10 minutes later, and just trying to normalize that behavior, trying to talk about how the lens that they're looking through might not be the biology lens. And so I have those conversations every single day, just reframing observations to be empowering and to like be the cheerleader that says you're going to be able to do this. I also love being the touch point for the families, so that if they have breastfeeding questions, they know I'm the person that they can call, so that there is consistent messaging instead of sort of fighting the, all the other opinions that happen around new families. So establishing yourself as an expert, and making sure that they can reach you whenever they need to, and then sort of reframing the concerns.
Perfect. There's a few more minutes. I'm going to try to squeeze in as many more questions as I can. The next one is, are there any foods that you would recommend avoiding with breastfeeding due to specific chemicals present in the food? I'm thinking caffeine or chocolate.
Oh God, you're going to make somebody not have chocolate? That would be tough. I don't know, like that would have been it for me, I think. No, there's nothing, like everything within reason, right? They can have caffeine, they can't have, 4 caffeines. Like they can have, a cup of coffee or such. And they can eat whatever they want their baby to be good at eating when we start solid foods at 6 months. So they want their kid to be good at chocolate, then you eat chocolate and get kids used to the taste of chocolate. So we are introducing the kids to the flavors of the food they will eventually eat. So got to make some parenting decisions there. But yeah, I don't stop people from eating really anything.
Okay, I'm going to squeeze one more question in here. The last question is, how do we combat the need to supplement when a baby loses weight in the first 24 hours?
So weight loss in the first 24 hours is a reflection of the IV fluids that mom got during delivery. There really isn't anything that says that the baby is capable of losing weight because they're not eating. They're losing weight because they're peeing off. This happens in babies after C-sections a whole lot more than after vaginal deliveries. But you can see babies lose 8 or 9% of their birth weight overnight, and that can't happen. That is not physiology. You cannot starve yourself into a 9% weight loss. So the first way to approach that is to start using the newborn weight loss tool that you can find at newbornweight.org, and plot the baby's weight loss versus the nomogram that they have there. And if babies who are above the 75th percentile on the newborn weight loss curve need somebody to evaluate the efficacy of the feeding, to make sure that the baby is just diuresing rather than having feeding issues. But you shouldn't be supplementing in the first 24 hours for weight loss. Like that is just diuresis. It is not a failure of breastfeeding.
Thank you for that. Looks like we are almost at the top of the hour. I want to thank you again, Dr. Thomas, for presenting for us today. And just a couple quick reminders before we end for the day. Once we end the webinar, a separate window will open with the evaluation. So we'd like to get your feedback from today. And you can visit medilaeducation.com for a list of the upcoming webinars, as well as to take advantage of the free online education we offer. And you can also read and subscribe to our Leading Lactation Insights from that website as well. And we thank everyone for joining us today for this webinar, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.